At the start of World War I, the aeroplane was so new that the British had not used it in battle before.
I am a hunter. When I have shot down an Englishman, my hunting passion is satisfied. For just quarter of an hour.
Young British pilots found themselves up against the Red Baron and the German hunting squadrons. To survive, they raced to turn their flimsy biplanes into deadly fighting machines and created a new and terrifying form of warfare. Now, two modern-day fighter pilots will face the same challenges as the pilots of World War I.
It's almost impossible!
Their aim, to find out how those heroic young men devised all the principles of aerial warfare in just 4 years. Principles that cost the blood and lives of thousands. At the start of World War I, eager recruits, some as young as 17, rushed to join the Army's new aircraft service, called the Royal Flying Corps. Cecil Lewis was typical. He had just left school when he took his first solo flight.
Put the nose down. 85, 90, 95. She was screaming and vibrating like hell. 100, 105. Now.
They are, for the most part, teenage boys and very young men. Most of it, I suspect, is thrill-seeking. I mean, they've got their hands on toys that they would never, in most walks of life, have got their hands on.
I opened the throttle. Nothing happened. I shut it and opened it again.
Of course, the idea excites them, and the speeds they travel at excites them, and the idea of flying excites them. I mean, it's new. Man's only been in the air for, what, less than 11 years?
This means a forced landing. Well, here goes.
The one thing that all these people shared was an absolute passion for flying. They wanted to fly. And flying was something new, and these people were making it up as they went along. And so what you find is that modern warfare was really being changed. The whole course of modern warfare was being changed by not very many people who had one shared passion.
Just days after the start of the war, a ramshackle selection of 64 unarmed aircraft set off for France on the Western Front. For these early pilots, it was an achievement to get across the Channel. The Frenchman Blériot had only just made it 5 years earlier. But through trial and error, these young aviators would develop the aeroplane for the modern age of aerial warfare. And what they discovered would write the textbook for today's combat pilots. Famous Blades aerobatic display. This is about as skilled as modern flying gets. We've asked two of these top guns to find out how these early pilots achieved so much with so little. Andy Offer and Mark Cutmore are both former RAF fighter pilots. Andy flew Harriers on operations in Afghanistan. Mark saw active service during the Yugoslavia conflict, flying ground attack Jaguars. They are the elite of the elite. Both have flown in the Red Arrows, with Andy leading the squadron. Now armed with original aircraft, They'll have a go at missions not attempted since World War I.
First time this has been done for probably 80, 90 years.
No pressure then?
So no pressure.
Mark will take reconnaissance photographs over enemy lines.
What do you think?
I'm scared.
Andy will direct artillery fire onto an enemy target. And both will engage each other in a classic dogfight. These skilled and experienced pilots will be tested to the limit.
Well, my German friend, if you're dead or not dead.
The first challenge is on an original Avro 504. One of the first planes to see active service. It's made of linen stretched over a wooden frame, and it's incredibly hard to fly. But that's what one of the pilots is about to try.
Okay, here we have the Avro 504. I haven't flown a rotary engine aircraft before.
Never.
No? Okay.
Never.
Their tutor is David Mackay, who's a test pilot on Virgin's spaceship Galactic.
In this engine we control both the air and the fuel, and getting the balance right.
The Avro still has
at
its
all
original
times,
engine,
changing air
an
speed now, so
unpredictable
the
beast
speed of
even
the
when it was
propeller is
new.
changing. It's
The
quite
pilot
a
has to
tricky
constantly
system to keep
adjust
going
it, as well as fly the plane.
The way we fly it in the air is that we try not to get it rich. If you get it too rich, the engine will stop and it probably won't clear before you impact the ground. So today, I don't know who's going to fly it, but whoever wants to fly it can do the takeoff, can fly it around. I'll do the engine though throughout. I'll keep an eye on the engine. Because,
Very wise.
Who would like to fly?
Do you take this one?
I'll take this one.
There's no quick flick of the ignition key. To get this engine started, first you have to inject fuel into the cylinders.
A little bit awkward.
Andy
getting it.
climbs in from the left. Many World War I pilots came from the cavalry, and aircraft designers copied the side they mounted their horses.
In the early days of the war, flying was a very, very dangerous occupation. And it was dangerous because the machines were very unreliable. More to the point, the engines were very unreliable. If your engine failed on takeoff, that was the most dangerous time because you didn't have a chance to recover the machine. You didn't yet have the speed to be able to bring it down safely. So it would just pancake onto the ground. A lot of people were killed on takeoff like that.
Contact! Swing it right now if you can. Very nice. What do you think of it so far?
Lovely. That feels very nice.
Many recruits learned to fly on Avros like this one. It was a deadly business. Over half the pilots who died in World War I were killed in training. Now comes the moment that even an experienced pilot found difficult. The landing.
That does not sound right.
Mark on the ground doesn't know the engine's been cut deliberately. It's the only way to slow it down for landing.
There's the power coming in again. And it will stop at no distance at all.
It doesn't have any brakes either, so they run it into the long grass.
Thank you, that's marvellous.
Sure.
How was it?
Absolutely amazing. Amazing. I mean, you can't imagine the smells when the engine starts, the smells. And there's definitely that fear and trepidation Because it's very short between engine starting and going, isn't it, Dave? It is. So then we just went. It flies beautifully, and we flew round and round, and you can feel every bump, and you can hear every change in the engine note. So.
And what about the end? Because we certainly heard the change in the note downwind.
Yes, I think
quite worrying.
It can be quite disconcerting from the ground when you suddenly hear this engine cutting out.
Yeah, I mean,
But that's the way you fly them.
Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Solo next trip?
I'd be too
in the
scared.
box kite.
But it was great. It was really, really good. Very nostalgic.
When the first aeroplanes arrived at the Western Front, many in the top brass couldn't see the point of these flying machines. They thought they'd scare the cavalry's horses. But in just days, aircraft would change the course of warfare forever. Just 5 days after arriving in France, the first aircraft was sent up to see what was going on. One of those eyes in the sky was Lieutenant Cuthbert Rabaghiati. He was shocked to see Germans advancing on the unprepared British expeditionary force. He raced back to warn its commander, Sir John French.
And he tells him what he's seen. And French sits him down and says, my young boy, this is very impressive, but unfortunately you can't possibly have seen what you think you've seen. Now tell me all about the aeroplane. Is it very cold up there? Does it go very high? And he's patronized by John French, when in fact everything he has told him has been true.
The young pilot's story was soon backed up, and Sir John French alerted his troops. Thanks to the aeroplane, thousands of British lives were saved, and Sir John became a stout supporter of the new flying machines. At first, observers drew what they saw. The cameras quickly replaced sketch pads. This was the first big role for the aeroplane in war. Photo reconnaissance. Soon the whole 400 miles of the Western Front was mapped from the sky, with detail right down to a sentry smoking a cigarette. Photographs showed where the Germans were moving troops and guns, and when they were about to attack. Developing the photos quickly was so crucial that prints were washed in meths and dried by setting fire to them. Now former RAF pilot Mark Cutmore is going to find out how difficult these missions were. Historian Joshua Levine and RAF Flight Lieutenant Richard Bush will show him how it was done.
This is what's known as a mosaic map. And it's a map of an entire area of the front line. And when I open it up, you'll see that it's made up of hundreds and thousands of individual photographs, individual reconnaissance photographs that have been placed together to make up the entire section of the front. So if you look closely over here, what you'll see is you've got the front line. This will be the German front line leading up this way. And all this area behind here will be German-held area. And this would be being done, the photographs would be being taken constantly. I mean, in 1918, the British would be mapping their entire frontline area twice a day. It was constant. It was like, this was the work that the Royal Flying Corps were carrying out. This was the office job. This was what it was for.
Richard worked with tactical imagery intelligence in Afghanistan and Iraq. What can he discover in photographs of a war from 90 years ago?
Well, I'd be looking away from the front line here is probably the most important thing for us, because if I was in the First World War, we'd know what the enemy trenches were like because you could see them from your own lines. But what's happening back here is what the aerial reconnaissance was giving you. And for example, over here we have a rail yard, and by just counting the number of trains there, you could see if an offensive was like to start, because that would indicate troops or ammunition moving in on the German lines. You can identify possible training areas, like here in the middle of fields, not really orientated with the front line, something the German divisions might have been using to practice trench raids on or assault techniques. And Just down here, you can see, just because of the white scarring there, 3 positions that are probably artillery pieces pointing back towards the front line. So possibly a site for a future barrage from the British artillery to try and destroy the German guns.
So Mark, Bristol fighter recce mission. First time this has been done for probably 80, 90 years.
No pressure then?
So no pressure.
David Mackay will fly Mark in a Bristol F-2B twin-seater. His mission? To locate and photograph an enemy balloon tethered outside its hangar. Mark will have to hang outside the aircraft using a bulky wooden camera. He and the camera need to be securely harnessed. If he drops the camera, it could fly back and rip off the tail.
Okay, so we're looking good. Are you all set in the back?
Yeah, I'm ready. Everything's secure. Okay. Oh, God.
This is not going to be easy.
No, I don't think so. I think that might be the balloon over by the wing top.
Mark spots the airship. Flying at 1,000 feet and 100 miles an hour, he must time exactly when he takes the photograph.
How are you getting on?
It's almost impossible. Yeah, well done. I think we got it actually.
Excellent.
Now that Mark has attempted his overhead shot, he also has to get a side view of the hangar.
Working.
How's that?
That felt like about 15 G.
You red arrows guys. You're not used to it, are you?
It was absolutely amazing. I mean, as soon as you stick your head out over the side with this huge camera, you're hanging on for grim death. You know you can't drop it. You know you've still got to get the picture. Because I feel under pressure today to get the picture. You know, it took me back to my days in the military, in fact. For the middle part of that trip, I didn't think about the fact that I was in an old aeroplane or anything. I was just desperately trying to get the photograph. I dread to think I'm going to look, but I felt like I've snot everywhere. God, that was something else. I'm now nervous as whether we got the shot or not. This is it.
Did you get it?
I hope so, but I have no. I'd pay a lot of money right now to make sure that I did, and I'm going to have a very quick look before I hand them over to you. Well, that's one that I did. Thank goodness for that. I'll now let you have a little look.
I think we don't need to send you back over the front for this one then.
Mission accomplished. Mark has achieved perfect views of the airship and its hangar. That's the one I'm most pleased with, actually, because I didn't have a clue whether I'd got that one or not.
No?
The buildings are taken from an oblique angle. Now, what would be the difference between taking the photo at an oblique angle or taking a photo from above? Why would you do one or the other?
In the First World War, they'd look at this way for what they used to call contact patrols when they were flying in support of their own troops. And it was really to give the commander, the general, the viewpoint as if he was standing on a hill overlooking his own front line, giving him the perspective of what his commanders on the ground are doing at that time.
I have massive empathy for them. The first time they did this must have been unbelievable. I'm sure people said, can't be done, what's the point? And they pressed on and made it work. So, huge amount of respect for what they did, especially now that I've actually had to go at it myself.
But Mark had it easy. Real missions were fired on from the ground by rifles, machine guns and anti-aircraft fire, known as Archie.
Archie was simply fierce. They hammered away at us the whole time we were on the job. I saw that the most serious damage was a large hole in the rear picture. The Archie which burst the tank went in about 6 inches behind my observer's back. It was the observer's second time in the air, and he didn't realise that anything had happened. It seems rather unfair that I should have all this excitement to myself.
British weren't alone in the skies. The Germans were up there too, taking photographs. But neither side worried about the other, as aeroplanes weren't armed.
There's a notion of World War I air fighting that's almost gentlemanly. I mean, when they first arrived in France in 1914, literally German and British aircraft are flying past and waving at each other.
It didn't take long before they realised they really ought to be doing something to try and prevent the other side doing what they were doing.
I spotted a strange aircraft, so I saddled up to him and saw he was a Hun. Got my shotgun out and fired it all away. Then I got my revolver and we had a revolver battle up there. We were very close to each other and I could see him quite well. I finished my 6 shots and he had finished his. We both waved each other goodbye and set off.
But war in the air was not to remain so gentlemanly.
Okay, there you go.
Within weeks, pistols were abandoned in favour of machine guns. Firing hundreds of rounds a minute, you had a much better chance of hitting your opponent. But the downside was, you might also shoot off your own wings and rudder.
To make the aeroplane into a true fighting machine, what it had to be able to do was to fire forward, be able to fire its machine guns forward. Now, since most of the First World War planes had their engines at the front, their propellers at the front, that meant actually firing through the propeller.
The French experimented with heavy metal deflector plates fitted to the propeller. Not ideal, as bullets could ricochet backwards. It was a Dutch aircraft designer called Anton Fokker working for the Germans who perfected the solution. This was the next big step that would transform the aircraft into a lethal weapon of war. Fokker produced a mechanism that triggered the machine gun only to fire between the gaps of the whirling blades. Invisible to the eye at normal speed, the timing had to be incredibly precise. The bullets must pass through a gap that lasts for only a 40th of a second. The slightest mechanical error and the pilot could lose his propeller. Fokker fitted the mechanism to his Eindecker in just 48 hours. This was the first truly effective fighter, an aircraft purpose-built for air-to-air combat.
And suddenly, enemy aeroplanes saw this German machine spitting fire through its propeller, and they were astounded and they were terrified. And the Fokker Eindeckers, even though they weren't terrific aeroplanes, very nearly blew the British machines out of the sky in 1915.
The British raced to synchronise their machine guns, while they took on the German Eindeckers with their own faster and more agile fighter, the DH-2. It had its propeller behind the pilot, so a machine gun could be fixed on the front. The Fokker Scourge, as it was known, was defeated. But the pendulum of war soon swung again. In September 1916, the skies over the Western Front darkened with the most powerful German plane yet, the Albatros D3. The Allies had nothing to match it. Equipped with twin Spandau machine guns, firing at 800 bullets a minute, it could rip an aircraft apart. These were perfect killing machines for the newly formed and highly organised German squadrons, known as Jastas. And their most feared pilot, Baron Manfred von Richthofen.
Who was, I think it's fair to say, quite a cold-blooded Prussian, whose hobby in life was hunting, and who simply saw air fighting as an extension of that.
Richthofen was an aristocrat. He was to paint his plane red, the colour of his old cavalry regiment, giving him the nickname the Red Baron. Richthofen's room was stuffed with the trophies of his hunting. Serial numbers of British aircraft lined the walls. His chandelier, a rotary engine taken from a downed plane.
And this is how he went to sleep at night. This is how he used to relax. So this man lived to fly and lived to kill.
On the 23rd of November 1916, the Red Baron struck terror in the heart of every British pilot, one of the greatest duels of World War I.
The Englishman tried to catch me up in the rear, while I tried to get behind him. Soon I discovered that I was not meeting a beginner. He had not the slightest intention to break off the fight. The gallant fellow was full of pride, and when we had got down to 3,000 feet, he merrily waved to me as if he would say, "Well, how do you do?" But by and by, the thing became a little too hot for him. I followed him at an altitude from 2,500 to 150 feet, firing all the time. My opponent fell, shot through the head, 150 feet behind our line.
The Englishman was Lano Hawker, VC, the best Royal Flying Corps pilot at the time. His death confirmed what British pilots already feared. They were outgunned and outperformed by Richthofen and the German squadrons. But now High Command was about to order them into a new battle with the Red Baron. The air war was about to enter its most deadly phase, when a pilot's average life expectancy dropped to just 18 hours. And the full horror of aerial warfare would be realized. January 1917. Stalemate on the Western Front. Locked in trench warfare for 3 years, hundreds of thousands of soldiers had lost their lives, and almost nothing had been gained. Now the British were to lead a new offensive at Arras to break the deadlock. It was a daring plan, and the aeroplane was crucial. In charge of the Royal Flying Corps was Major General Hugh Trenchard, a gruff, blunt man. He was the mastermind behind the British Army's Air Force. In just 3 years, it increased the number of pilots from under 100 to now over 1,000.
Sir Hugh Trenchard, described by one pilot as a totally inarticulate genius. He had absolutely no social graces whatsoever. What he did know how to do was to run the Royal Flying Corps.
Trenchard always ordered his pilots to take the fight to the Germans. But this time he was taking a big risk. Though he had twice as many aircraft as the enemy, they were old and obsolete. Easy meat for the Red Baron and the German squadrons. He made a cold calculation. As long as he didn't lose more than 2 British pilots for 1 German, they would still win, even if it meant most of his men must die. He ordered them out on photo reconnaissance and the deadly role of artillery ranging.
One major feature of the Arras offensive is going to be artillery, and if you can launch an aeroplane into the air to tell the guns where to fire, then you're at a huge advantage, and that's one of their crucial objectives in terms of this battle.
The artillery was positioned up to 10 to 15 miles behind the lines, too far away to see where they were firing. But once again, aircraft offered the perfect solution. From the air, pilots could tell them how close the shells were to hitting the target. To find out how difficult this was, Andy will attempt to do it in exactly the same way as at the Battle of Arras. He'll work out how far shells have missed using an ingenious device called the clock code. This is how it works. The artillery is to destroy this enemy gun emplacement. When Andy sees a shell explode, he'll use the clock code to measure how far it missed by. A shell landing at this point would be in the circle B at 7 o'clock. Then Andy radios back the position to the artillery. Using this information, the gun commander can calculate how to get his next shell closer.
There will be a shockwave with this, quite a big...
Firing live rounds could hit Andy in the air, so ground charges will simulate where the shells explode. But he'll have to keep a close watch on his altitude. He's flying above real explosions.
I'll tell you what's flashing through my brain immediately is I have no problem, I think, flying the aeroplane, so that's going to be okay. I've done a lot of close air support for real, loads. What is concerning me is the rudimentary way that we're going to communicate the messages, because we don't have the same sophistication that we have today.
Radio was still pretty primitive. Andy will use a Morse code transmitter. Messages will be picked up by a station close to the artillery. Now the exercise begins. Andy won't have much time. The biplane can only carry enough fuel to give him 20 minutes above the target. He signals ready and waits to see the gun fire.
Fire!
Andy now has 19 seconds, the time it takes the shell to reach the target, to position the aircraft so we can see where it explodes.
Okay, well, I thought that was Charlie 8.
Andy is spot on. The explosion was in Band C at 8 o'clock. Receiving the signal, the runner takes Andy's sighting to the field gun. The gun commander calculates a new elevation and direction.
Train right 2 degrees, up 20.
The next round should land closer to the target.
Set. Fire!
It must. Andy's running low on fuel.
I think I have another 9 minutes.
The shell misses.
That looks like Bravo
2. Train right, 1 degree. Elevate 5. Set.
This will be Andy's last chance. He's just 1 minute of fuel left.
Oh yeah! Destroyed!
A direct hit. Andy signals back the letters OK.
Target hit, well done fellas. Right, let's keep firing on the same spot. Keep at it. Let's have some more.
At Arras in 1917, the Allies fired 2.5 million shells. And thanks to the Royal Flying Corps, vaporized the German lines before the main attack. But success came at a heavy cost. The Red Baron and the German squadrons made mincemeat of the old-fashioned British planes. They nicknamed them Kultusfleisch, cold meat.
The RFC pilots were up against it going into the Arras offensive. Not only have they got to get their job done in terms of observation and reconnaissance, but they've got to battle off German scout planes, such as the Albatros, with grossly inferior aircraft.
To protect each other, the RFC pilots will circle their planes up like wagons, then slowly inch their way back home to safety. But they continued to soften up the enemy defences. By the 9th of April, it was time for the infantry to attack.
Sent up. Terrific wind blowing and as bumpy as Satan. First passenger soon got fed up with things and passed me a note saying he felt sick and wanted to go home. I passed a note back reminding him there was a war on and telling him to think of the poor devils down below.
The initial attacks were a success. By destroying the German defences, the Royal Flying Corps had saved thousands of soldiers' lives. The much fought over high ground at Vimy Ridge was captured, but the offensive had only just begun. And the RFC had already lost a third of its aircraft. This was much more than Trenchard had bargained for. He desperately needed better fighter planes. He had one hope. The next generation of aircraft was on its way. The fighters were to be flown by a new squadron of carefully hand-picked pilots and promising new recruits. The squadron's number was 56, and it would pioneer the next leap forward in aerial tactics and strategy. Personally responsible for the selection of crew was an Australian, Major Richard Blomfield. One of the talented young pilots was young Lieutenant Cecil Lewis.
Efficiency was Blomfield's watchword. He had all his pilots out for a run before breakfast, kept them busy around the sheds all day, and turned them loose in town at night. They had to be tip-top aviators and bring down Hun. Nothing else mattered.
Blomfield was quite a peculiar little man. He would walk everywhere with a cane, pointing at things and directing everything. Control freak springs to mind as well, but I think that's probably why he was such an effective administrator and organiser.
The 56th Squadron was famous before it had even flown a single sortie. Blomfield had the Royal Flying Corps' leading ace, Albert Ball. Just turned 20, with nearly 50 victories, he was Britain's Red Baron and a national celebrity.
There are stories of Ball landing and acting dead when he's outnumbered, just slumped over his pilot seat pretending to be dead, and when the Germans land alongside him to take him prisoner, suddenly he roars into action and he takes off again. These are the sorts of story that may well not be true, may well never have happened, but all the same, what they did was to foster this reputation for this young, very, very young, public school educated pilot.
The real Ball was a loner. He preferred to live in a small hut, tending a garden next to his aeroplane, ready to fly into action when the Hun appeared. The other pilots nicknamed him Lonely Testicle. His only close relationship was with his family.
I do not think anything bad about the Hun. He's just a good chap with very little guts, trying to do his best. Nothing makes me feel more rotten than to see him go down, but you see, it's either them or me.
Ball lived alone and he fought alone. He was a reckless fighter. Falling out of the sun, he'd fly unseen underneath his opponent. Nerves of steel, he waited until he was less than 15 feet before firing his Lewis gun directly into the cockpit compartment. Escape such merciless treatment.
Albert Ball took enormous risks with his flying. His flying was really without tactics. He used to throw himself into the middle of a melee and just try and fire his way out. And he was a very good pilot, so for a very long time he managed it.
On the 13th of March, Albert Ball took delivery of the first of 56 Squadron's long-awaited new fighters, the SE-5. Would this be the plane to defeat the Red Baron and the German Jastas? The SE-5 was supposed to be the fastest fighter of the war, stable to fire from, yet quick to maneuver in a dogfight. But when Ball landed, there was a big surprise.
Everybody simply couldn't believe it, that this was the new SE-5 fighter. The thing looked hopeless. It was hopelessly slow, and when it landed, it was boiling. We went through the other rather obvious faults.
For all of the excitement about the SE-5, it arrives and they hate it. Ball especially is completely scathing of it. There's numerous serious technical difficulties with it.
But Blomfield needed to get his new squadron into action. He decided they'd have to fix the faults on the SE-5s themselves.
I'll get the 916s for you.
I found Ball in dungarees, covered with oil, working like any ordinary mechanic.
Ball started ripping out anything he could to make the plane lighter and faster. 56 Squadron worked around the clock, but the changes would take 2 weeks. Meanwhile, the Royal Flying Corps was losing 12 aircraft and 20 crew every day. Now, 90 years on, former RAF pilot Andy Offer will test this World War I biplane. This is the SE-5.
Oh my goodness.
The fighter aircraft that in 1917 the British hoped would bring down the Red Baron. Andy's going to fly it. What does he look for in a fighter?
You want a big engine, a lot of power, which is going to help, with a light airframe, nice and manoeuvrable so it can turn, and you want great visibility. The guy who sees first will probably win. This is my ship.
Good luck. You need an aeroplane that's going to be able to, get its weapon system onto that other aeroplane as quick as possible, so you can get in, get out, take the shot, and then move on to something else.
It's got a very flat front, so it's going to be very draggy. I'm looking there thinking there's a lot of bits and pieces around that aeroplane that's going to restrict your visibility.
What do you think?
I'm scared.
To make the SE-5 ready for combat, 56 Squadron stripped off every ounce of unnecessary weight to make it go faster. Speed made the difference between life and death.
We modified the SE-5 by removing the canopy, eliminating the armour plating and tossing out the seat raising mechanism. As a result, we got 7 miles per hour additional speed, faster than the Albatross, and that's what mattered.
Well, it feels nice on the controls.
Andy starts to push the aircraft. Does it have the right amount of stability? Too much and it won't turn fast enough in a fight. Too little and it'll be uncontrollable. The SE-5 performs well, but then comes the dangerous bit. landing. This has worried Andy from the start.
It's an old, light aeroplane which has not got controls that have been evolved over, 60, 70, nearly 100 years. It's very much back to basic controls, and it's going to be the last 20 feet.
Andy aborts. He's going too fast. Too fast again, and he risks breaking the undercarriage and propeller strike. Too slow, and he'll stall and crash.
How was it? You've survived.
It's
Well
amazing.
done.
Thank you very much. It was good fun.
Was it?
Really good. Obviously scared about the landing.
All the way through?
Yeah, but nice to fly.
Yeah, looked good.
Really nice to fly. In the air, I was saying to myself, it's amazing, nearly 100 years difference. Nearly 100 years.
Yeah.
And it still flies beautifully.
At last, on the 22nd of April, 56 Squadron was ready to take their SE-5s into action. On his first sortie in a new plane, Ace Albert Ball had 2 kills.
I got one of them and set it on fire at 14,000 feet. Poor old chap inside. I should simply hate to be set on fire.
The modified SE-5 soon made its mark. It was a milestone in aircraft design. Some consider it the Spitfire of World War I. Now the pressure was on the pilots to do their job and bring down the Red Baron. In between the intense periods of fear and danger, the pilots lived a strange, schizophrenic existence.
I'm sitting in a wood, out of the sun, and the only things to be heard are the machine guns shooting away in the distance, and the mess gramophone.
These were people who were living very different lives from everybody else on the Western Front. These were people who were living in chateaus. They were going swimming during the day. They were eating well at night, and yet they were going up twice a day to do the most dangerous thing conceivably possible on the Western Front.
Back in the air, it was a lonely existence, where one constant fear lived in the mind of every pilot. Fire. It could devour an aircraft made of wood and linen in minutes. And there was no escape. Pilots weren't allowed to wear parachutes. High Command believed it would encourage them to bail out. For a pilot crashing, the choice was stark.
The wreck plunged vertically. The others went after him. They could see him, struggling to get clear of his harness, then half standing up, deciding whether to jump. He didn't, and the machine and he was smashed to nothingness. God, imagine his last moments, seeing the ground rush up at him, knowing he was a dead man, unable to move, unable to do anything but wait for it. A parachute would have saved him.
Just a week after 56 Squadron went into action, the Royal Flying Corps reported its worst casualty figures of the war. In just 1 month, over 300 aircrew were killed, wounded or missing. The Royal Flying Corps was now known as the Suicide Club. The month, Bloody April.
The life expectancy of new pilots just plummeted. You read accounts that the life expectancy of somebody from arriving on the front to their death became 11 days. That's no time at all. And what that effectively meant was when new pilots arrived, they were barely even welcomed onto the squadron, because the old hands, the existing members of the squadron, didn't feel it was worth their while talking to these men. They wouldn't be around for long enough.
You sat down to dinner, faced by the empty chairs of men you had laughed with at lunch. They were gone. The next day, new men would laugh and joke from those chairs. Some might be lucky and stick it for a bit. Some chairs would be empty again very soon, and so it would go on.
I think the way in which pilots deal with death varies. Some of them, it sends them hell-bent on revenge, to go and find as many Germans as possible and pay them back for what they've done to their friends. Others get depressed and start to lose their minds. I think 6 months is all you can expect of any man to do that job at the front without a break, without starting to crack up.
They feared death, they feared injury, they feared the loss of friends, and they feared fear, which could either betray them as cowards or just drive them mad over weeks and months of torment. And of course, there were some who were driven mad. And I've got here some case sheets from hospitals. And these are a terribly depressing reading. Here's a typical man, Second Lieutenant Blenkham. And it says about him, on admission, this officer was in an intensely nervous condition. Talks about twitchings of facial muscles. He suffers from insomnia and dreams of aeroplane crashes. And then at the end of his report, it says, discharged from hospital as permanently unfit.
The stress of combat was also affecting the pilots of 56 Squadron. Albert Ball tried to calm his nerves, playing his violin by the light of a magnesium flare.
Oh, do get tired of always having to kill. And I'm really beginning to feel like a murderer. So I'll be so pleased when I have finished.
Albert Ball is very young. He's too young for everything he's seen by this point in the war. I don't think he's necessarily the most mature of young men either, and by the beginning of 1917 the strain was beginning to show, and it had begun affecting his personality as well.
My opinion of him had been of someone who was not exactly arrogant but brave. But that was completely different from the young man that I saw sitting in my office on that day. When I saw him, I said, "Cheer up, old boy, what's wrong?" "Oh," said Ball, "I've got a hunch. I don't think I'm going to last very long."
On the 7th of May 1917, Ball set off in an 11-strong patrol against the Red Baron's squadron.
May the 7th is the worst day for 56 Squadron. They've only been in the air in active combat for about 2 weeks. And it all culminates in this field. 2 pilots are horrifically injured. One loses his leg after a bullet almost severs it in mid-air. Another one is shot through the wrist and the bullet takes off the control panel of his SE5 as well. He just about gets to the ground before he faints through the pain.
It was late and the weather was deteriorating badly. Ball had been fighting for 3 hours.
By the time Albert Ball encountered his last German aircraft, there was only 2 or 3 pilots left in action in 56. One of those saw Albert Ball pursuing what we later know to be the Red Baron's brother, Lothar von Richthofen, at low altitudes, which was typical Ball.
I believe I was the last to see him in his SE5 going east at 8,000 feet. He flew straight into the white face of an enormous cloud. I followed. But when I came out on the other side, he was nowhere to be seen.
Lothar von Richthofen was forced to the ground by Ball and managed to get out of his plane just in time for Albert Ball to come out of a cloud bank upside down. He was too low to the ground to be able to turn over, and he hit the ground round about here. Didn't die straight away, but lived long enough for a local girl to run onto the scene. She pulled him out of his aircraft, and he literally breathed for a few more seconds, opened his eyes once, and then he died here.
All next day, a feeling of depression hung over the squadron. We mooned about the sheds, still hoping for news. The day after that, hope was given up.
Albert Ball was posthumously awarded the VC. When he died, he had 67 victories, second only to the Red Baron. But Ball's death was not only the end for a venerated ace, but also a whole way of fighting.
The people like Albert Ball you could view as gifted amateurs. People who were very skilled pilots, but hadn't really put a lot of thought into how it was they were going to conduct their fighting and how they were going to get out at the end of their fight. Those sort of people, in the end, had to die.
In the summer of 1917, a new era of aerial warfare was dawning. Solo heroics were dead. Now 56th Squadron focused on large formations as the key to success. The Red Baron also realised the benefits of teamwork. He combined his hunting packs into one mass squadron of 50 planes. Travelling to hot spots, they set up temporary airfields surrounded by tents, giving them the nickname Richthofen's Flying Circus. Leading the changes was a new pilot to 56th Squadron, James McCudden.
McCudden is a professional. He's very much a thinking pilot. He's not an Albert Ball who just throws himself into the middle of a fight and hopes to be able to make his way out. He's somebody who will only take on a fight, will only actually engage somebody in combat if he feels he has a good chance of winning and escaping at the end of it. This is a completely new approach, really.
McCudden had trained as a mechanic. He'd seen firsthand the consequences of reckless heroics. He supercharged his SE-5A to take it to extreme altitudes above 20,000 feet to reach high-flying German reconnaissance planes. At this height, oxygen is thin and temperatures fall to minus 40 degrees.
James McCudden makes a great art form out of altitude flying. This isn't without cost to himself. He spent a lot of time lying down with headaches due to altitude sickness. It was freezing cold up there. He's even going up there when he's sick as well and shouldn't have been in the air. And so it was at a cost to himself.
Aerial combat had come a long way from shotguns and pistols. Once there had been duels between a couple of aircraft. Now there were mass engagements between hundreds. This was the true era of the dogfight. What can modern-day fighter pilots learn from the age of dogfights and biplanes? Former RAF pilots Mark Cutmore and Andy Offer are about to find out. They're going to challenge each other to a duel. Like the World War I counterparts, they practice on bicycles. Pilots in combat still use many of the World War I maneuvers to this day.
I'm saddled up.
If you do get into a position where the aircraft is right behind you, saddled up and ready to fire, that doesn't mean that, you have to roll over and die. Turn as aggressively
Weapons
as you can.
instructor,
Close down the
RAF
range
Flight
and
Lieutenant
use
Matt
the hopefully
Peterson
try and
gives them
force
some
the
hot
enemy to
tips.
fly through. Whereupon you're turning your defence into now an attack.
They come from training manuals issued towards the end of the war, based on hard-won lessons that cost many young pilots their lives.
As a nation, we like fighting. We like working on our own responsibility, and we are not at our best till we are fighting against odds.
When we listen to what's been written in the books and the tactics are there, actually putting those into practice is going to be fascinating. Will we be nervous? Yes. Is it going to be completely different? Yes. Here we go. This is yours.
This is mine.
Andy will fly for the Royal Flying Corps.
I do think it looks a bit more sturdy. Do you?
Yeah, I do.
Mark is going to fly for the Germans, a Junkers CL-1, a sophisticated ground attack aircraft and a good rival to Andy's SE-5.
My goodness, he moves.
The rear gunner's place
I don't
is
know,
taken
but I'm
by
hoping it's gonna be the
Hans.
So, Hans. We're going to do just fine.
For the dogfight, Hans will be relieved of his duties as rear gunner.
Do you really want to win?
I definitely don't want to lose.
Do you feel the same way?
I don't. All pilots are the same. They are the most competitive people. I know exactly what he's thinking, and I know exactly what I'm thinking. We would want to win. It's just natural. We want to win.
Mark and Andy get ready for the fight.
Dogfights were a very common occurrence in the First World War, but they never really ever happened again, because by the Second World War, by the time of the Battle of Britain, aeroplanes were simply too quick, and one aeroplane only had another one in its sights for a split second at a time. And yet one quite interesting thing is, if you watch a science fiction movie nowadays, if you watch Star Wars, for example, and watch the X-Fighters take on the TIE fighters, you'll notice that what they're really having is a First World War dogfight. And yet that never really happened again after 1918.
To see who wins, both aircraft are rigged with cameras on the machine guns. When Mark or Andy pulls the trigger, the moment they fire will be recorded. To give both pilots an equal advantage, the attack starts head-on. Mark almost gets onto Andy's tail, but he overshoots, and in a classic dogfight maneuver, Andy climbs, dives, and now gets on Mark's tail.
Snap decisions, cool head, and eyes like a blue.
Round one goes to Andy. The positions are soon reversed as Mark gets on Andy's tail.
There is an essential in which it differs from the war on the ground. It's absolute cold-bloodedness.
assess the cameraman footage.
Well, my German friend, you feel dead or not dead?
Pretty dead.
Oh, that was
And
good.
yeah.
If you were the man in front, you would be petrified, wouldn't you? Oh, that was a good shot. Yeah.
I really felt like I was in the element. My head was in the the airflow. I could see Offo in the other aeroplane. I'm trying desperately hard to get behind him and shoot him. I found it more exciting than the clinical sort of flying that the military fast jets have become. And you can actually see somebody's eyes and see, if you hit them and you see them slump. I'm sure that's quite a difficult thing to deal with, to be honest, because the reality is pretty hideous.
Oh, now
that could have been my head.
That could well have been.
But if you think fabric, if a bullet goes through the fabric, it's not too bad, is it? So really, you've got to hit the person or the engine. Oh, that's
nearly.
So who won?
We've gone through it frame by frame. We've looked very closely. We've added up the figures, and what has happened is that Andy made more kills, more decisive kills than Mark. You were actually raking the pilot and the engine more consistently than Mark was. So it's a very, very close thing, but one would have to say that on balance, the winner was Andy, the winner was Great Britain, I'm afraid to say.
Probably good. Well done.
But it was a very, very close thing, and Germany can be very proud of itself.
Can we go up again now?
Yeah.
After 3 weeks of filming, what have Mark and Andy discovered about the World War I counterparts?
I think there's no difference. I think they launched off generally not really thinking about their safety too much, because although we build in safety into what we do, if you thought about it too much, I don't think you'd do our job.
I think we would have been similar to as they were. I think we'd have, excitement, definitely, camaraderie, with each other. We'd have been all of those things that we are today. I think we'd have been the same.
'56 Squadron went from strength to strength, achieving a record 22 aces and over 400 victories, more than any other German or British squadron. Their reputation was secured on the 23rd of September 1917 in what would become the most epic dogfight of World War I. During a routine patrol, they came across German ace Werner Voss.
Werner Voss, this extraordinary pilot who used to paint a mustachioed face on the front of his aircraft, and he flew in a silk shirt to attract the women, so he said.
With more than 40 kills, he was second only to the Red Baron and a more accomplished pilot.
They come across Werner Voss by accident, and after that follows apparently 10 to 15 minutes of the best display of aerial fighting that could have been seen at that point. Voss is said to have been amazing. He manages to evade 6-7 pilots at one time, and they said he looked invincible.
At one point, Voss's plane was at the apex of a cone of bullets from 10 machine guns.
And they were simply unable to shoot this man down because he was turning so quickly. He was carrying out manoeuvres that they, and this included some of the greatest British pilots, people like James McCudden, manoeuvres that they had never seen before.
Eventually, the young pilot Arthur Rhys-Davids got on Voss's tail.
Obviously, it's impossible to pinpoint with accuracy exactly whose bullets hit who and who was responsible for downing Voss, but it's believed that it was Rhys-Davids. He managed to get on Voss's tail, and Voss began flying in a straight line, which he hadn't yet done, and Rhys-Davids followed him down, apparently so close that the tip of his propeller was almost touching the rudder of Voss's plane.
Voss was downed by the future. A future that 56 Squadron had ruthlessly demonstrated now lay in teamwork, minimising risk, and supporting each other through tactics.
Everybody was talking about the Voss fight. Rhys Davies was so excited he was stammering. He was always after a fight. Keith Musprat said that this chap they'd fought had put up the finest fight that he'd ever seen anywhere. It was a wonderful fight. By a wonderful fighter pilot.
You couldn't apparently understand a word he was saying when he got out of that plane because he was so excitable about what had happened, but he wasn't excitable about having killed Werner Voss, and he's actually quoted as saying, "If only I could have brought him down alive." He didn't take any pleasure in killing him.
In 1917, the tide of the air war turned for the final time. Well-trained pilots flying the SE-5A and the new Sopwith Camel seized victory for the Royal Flying Corps. In April 1918, the Red Baron II was shot down. When soldiers reached his crashed plane, he uttered one word: kaput. The British buried him with full military honours. The young pilots of World War I had changed warfare forever. Flying had started as an innocent pastime. Now they had developed it into a technology to deliver death and destruction. By the end of the war, heavy bombers were blitzing the citizens of British and German cities. But the young pilots also brought to life, briefly, an earlier chivalric age, when men fought duels and could still look their opponents in the eye.
These were people who made up the rules as they went along. These were people who were living by the seat of their pants. They were having to make things up in order to survive, in order to always be one step ahead of the enemy. These were people for whom rules simply didn't exist the way they existed for everybody else. And it's hard not to respect them and develop a deep affection for them.
I think I see traits of guys I know in all of them. I see the sarcastic ones, I see the funny ones, I see the ones that wind people up because they're hyperactive. Just because they lived 90 years ago doesn't mean you have any less in common with them as a human being than you would if they walked past you in the street tomorrow.
Over 14,000 British pilots lost their lives in World War I. Just a month after Arthur Rhys Davies shot down Werner Voss, he too was killed.
So Arthur had gone too. We had been great friends. Sometimes, returning from patrol, we would break off and chase each other round about the clouds, zooming their summits, plunging down their white precipitous flanks. At such times, the war was quite forgotten. Was this quiet, contemplative boy the hero of 100 fights? He shrugged his shoulders. It was our job, he said. We ought to try to do it well. When peace came, we will do better.